Look, guys, I've been reading comics for 20 years, and I have to say that the last decade or so of events have been bad and really bad. And not just that, but when you go back and you look at events from before the golden era of events, which is like the 2000s, in my opinion, a lot of them aren't very good either. So we're here to discuss why event comics are bad. What is it about event comics? What is it about the formulation of them, the creation of them, that leads to books that are just not very good? I mean, if you look at the current climate, as we record this, Night Terrors is in the rearview mirror. That's an all-time bad one. Beast World is near conclusion. It's not bad, but I wouldn't say it's particularly good either. And Marvel hasn't fared very much better. AXC Judgment Day was kind of clunky.
Right.
We've had a string of subpar X-Men events, and it just doesn't feel like anything on the event front is sticking right now. So why do you guys think that is now, and why do you think it was historically, and why was it not that way in the 2000s?
For me, I think there's a lack of long-term planning at the big two. One of the reasons why I'm nostalgic for the Civil War era is because there was a plan for the next event too. Things had a clear line between things. Civil War led into the heroes being divided, which then meant the Skrulls can then swoop in and take over, which then led to Norman Osborn rising and Siege. There was a clear line there that felt like a giant story was being told. Even in like Blackest Night, you went from Blackest Night where, it kind of reestablished the core in the DC universe into Brightest Day, which then brought back a whole bunch of characters that hadn't been touched in forever, including Swamp Thing. I think there's a lack of that.
And to that point, even before Blackest Night, the world of Identity Crisis into Infinite Crisis, and then 1 year later, and 52, and Countdown, all of that leading up to Final Crisis. Your mileage may vary on that, but all of that felt like one big plan.
And I think DC specifically, it helped that they had 52. It helped they had Brightest Day. Those weekly books by a core group of creators to kind of, because that was almost an event in and of itself that really helped shape the world at the time. Because I think events should be about the world as a whole and the universe.
Line-wide events.
What was that?
You're saying line-wide events should be like that. Not
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah. Not like a crossover like Gotham War or something. Yeah.
Yeah, and to that effect, you could talk about Crisis on Infinite Earths, which is like the original good big event, because it accomplished, again, your mileage may vary, it accomplished its goal of tidying up the DC universe, because from the discovery of Earth 2 and the various universes that DC just couldn't keep track of, or couldn't answer questions about, if so and so is over here, why can't so and so come help?
Right.
Well, because they're in different universes, and that's just too hard to explain. So Crisis on Infinite Earths tidied all that up, crammed everything into one universe, and then gave a reasonable relaunch, if not reboot, to everything else.
That the earlier point on the way that things are planned out in advance, it reminds me of the saga format, not saga comics, but like the saga format in manga, where you have sagas which stretch various arcs and are composed of arcs, and then the arcs within those are composed of individual runs, and then those runs are single issues, right? So they all ladder up to a singular vision that allows for things to pay off, that start and initiate and lead up and allow for a resolution at the end. The beginnings can lay the foundations, the middle can build the tensions, and then obviously the end. You have to sort of you can tie off loose ends, but realistically, what you want is to validate the things that came before by some large shift or change. And that's kind of the feeling that I get from a lot of comics is they don't have the saga. They have the arc, which is cool, but the arc becomes standalone. And if we're trying to compare that to what the event would be, or at least the way that I'm comparing it, it falls flat because that can't stand on its own two legs. Maybe it can be good, it can be workable, but to that earlier point, and even the stuff we read when we had originally done back in the day, a Civil War book club, like that had direction, and you can see collateral damage pile up and be distributed down the line until it finally culminated in something huge.
Well, Marco, I feel like what you just described is storytelling. You know, beginning, middle, and end, payoff, you know, all that jazz. And, you know, in a larger sense, there is a story of the Marvel universe, or at least you hope there is. And we had that in the 2000s, but there are also individual stories. And, you know, what I found satisfying about events in that era was the fact that, you know, you could see it coming in the sense that, you know, Civil War was built off of Secret War, not Wars, War, Secret War, which was a book that came before that established characters like Quake and certain things that were going on that led to Civil War. You know, it even is built on the back of House of M, which shattered the Avengers. It's built on the back of Disassembled. It's built on the back of a lot of stuff. It's very much like, yeah, that happened, and then this. Whereas a lot of comics now feel like, okay, that happened. We're gonna do something else now. It just doesn't feel like it builds on the past at all. And on top of that, they come out of nowhere. It's like, all right, it's time for all the DC heroes to go to sleep. Why? I don't know. Who? I don't know. Whatever.
I'm looking at the wiki for Marvel events, specifically 2020 major events. We have Empire, King in Black, Devil's Reign, Judgment Day, and Blood Hunt coming up. Is there a line between any of those? No. Like Empire just came up out of nowhere. I enjoyed it for what it was, but it didn't have really lasting effects. It just jumped out of nowhere. It's like, oh, the Celestial Messiah's back. Here we go. Same for like King in Black. It was more of like a Venom book event that then the other books had to kind of coalesce towards, but only really gave Venom a clear ending. So yeah, none of these really check in together at all.
Yeah. There's no through line. And even, you know, those events you listed off, you know, those are things that primarily spawned in, you know, an individual's book and then it was made into a larger event when it didn't necessarily need to be that. Like Devil's Reign being an event was awesome. It's one of the better events in recent memory, but certainly it could have just been in the pages of Daredevil. Not that I would have preferred that, but you could have done it. It didn't necessitate a response from the whole Marvel.
And most of those events happen in different corners, you know.
Yeah.
King in Black had its Venom corner, and then Empire was in space the whole time.
I think a part of the change from the 2000s, quality aside, because quality is something that I do want to talk about. I think the events are just worse. But aside from that, they Marvel and DC both changed their approach to events in response to audiences. People got exhausted by, you know, one or two or sometimes three events from either company that then sucked in all the books around it to reflect it. And that's a strategy that you're either going to like or not like. And so many people, I guess, didn't like it and claimed event fatigue that Marvel and DC switched their strategy up. And I think that's a lot of what we see now. The last events that I can think of that really, really did it the way it used to be done are Secret Wars and Secret Empire. Everything else is just like, whoa, that came out of left field. And it's not reflected anywhere else. Dark Crisis had the Justice League dead, but none of the Justice League books stopped being published.
Yep.
And in their core books, if I remember correctly, they were doing whatever they were doing. You had to get the Worlds Without a Justice League book to see the world reflect. Actually, that book didn't even reflect what happened. That book was just those characters off in their offshoot, holding pattern that Dark Crisis put them in, like the Superman one and the Batman one. But you still had Superman and Batman being published, and they were doing whatever.
Yeah.
That's confusing and it's weird, and I don't think that it helps make the events feel big and important.
And I think to that, the through line was supposed to be infinite frontier, right? Like the premise of a new possibility, which Dark Crisis seems to have therein upended and undercut for then Dawn of DC. For like there's this need for continual newness that then feeds that cycle that you're talking about, because it's like, well, we need to start afresh again with these characters or with these kinds of concepts, and that gets quickly repetitive.
Do you think something like what Secret Wars did to the line of Marvel Comics scared people to the point where it ruined Event Comics going forward? With
No.
removing it was all ongoings, right, Sean?
I don't remember. I think it was.
I think it was all ongoings and
pretty
replaced
close,
with those
yeah.
Battle World stories. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is about as drastic as you can do outside of New 52.
But I also think if you were reading stuff at the time, like you knew this was going on.
Oh, and it was projected. Like you knew this line-wide event was going to happen. Yeah.
That's what I love so much about it. Okay, there are people who, weren't reading Avengers or New Avengers at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Even though it's the biggest book and certainly at that time was the foundation of Marvel. It's not so anymore, but that was the bedrock. And so if you weren't reading that, then okay, maybe you weren't as aware, but a lot of books had that banner that said, time is running out, and counting down towards that and the ultimate universe and everything that was going around that. It felt like there was a direction for the entire Marvel story, the story of Marvel. I don't feel like there's a story of Marvel anymore. I feel like it's just whatever. And so to me, if you're a reader and you know that something exciting is happening, that's pretty cool. I would think Secret Wars was pretty cool to a reader.
Event Comics now, to use a wrestling term, are cheap pops.
Mm-hmm.
They're, all right, summer's coming up. We need to boost sales real quick. Let's do an event. And I don't feel like they're used anything other than to make a quick buck off something, rather than it being the story that justifies it.
Yeah. I mean, like right now, Blood Hunt, for example. I would think it's unfair to say that they haven't built towards that at all. I think that that's a story that they've been building to for a long time. Now, this takes us into the quality part because they're doing something right. They're trying to build towards something. I'm with that. The problem is that I personally have not given a damn about the stories that are building towards this Blood Hunt. And also, it's not as if Blood Hunt was the end game. That specific event wasn't necessarily the end game. Just that something needed to happen with the monsters and vampires and everything else in Marvel. Civil War was the end game.
Blood Hunt feels like they're like, all right, we need an event. What can we tackle? Like, what's a looming threat?
Right.
Oh, vampires. Yeah.
But I think an event that had decent scaffolding was AXE Judgment Day. Because it was built off of the Avengers, the X-Men, and the Eternals. With the Eternals being the real core book, because Kieran Gillen was on the Eternals, and everything was going to spin out of that. Yeah. The problem sort of became that the event itself just wasn't that good.
Fell flat. It fell flat because they couldn't keep up the momentum that had been built in the Eternals. Like all of that was drummed up specifically around those characters, and the X-Men and the Avengers felt ancillary. They fit them in, but they felt like shoehorsed.
Well, and I also feel like
Shoehorned.
most people were probably only interested in one corner of it.
Yeah.
Like Marco was really into the Eternals. I was kind of into the Eternals, but I was really interested in the X-Men, and everything was reacted toward the X-Men. I had no idea what was going on in the Avengers.
Right.
Judgment Day is a weird one because I feel like it is a product of bigger editorial issues. Because as soon as Eternals the movie didn't do well, they're not in books anymore.
Yeah.
I mean, I think AXC had all the markers of a great event. It had everything it needed to be great. It had the build up, it had momentum, it was built up in several different books. It's hard to imagine that you couldn't have known that that was going on if you were reading Marvel. But going back to the quality, it just didn't connect on that level. I just don't think it was that great. And that's going to happen. Like, no shame in, not knocking it out of the park. Not every 2000s event was good. Like, I really, really did not like World War Hulk. Was it built towards? Yes, they sent the Hulk into space like years before World War Hulk happened. That was fun as hell.
And like Fear itself, another one where I was like, didn't care much for it, but there was build up to it. So sometimes you swing and miss.
So we can't really say to the quality, right? Like, that's going to be creative team. That's going to be all that. But in your mind, what needs to happen? What are the mechanics of an event that is good for you?
It's not a mechanics of the event. It's mechanics of the world building. And that's the architect system. I think Marvel's architects at the time had plans for the universe. And there was a clear layout. I don't know if DC ever did that, where it was essentially a writer's room to guide the universe. But I think something like that is greatly missed at Marvel and DC currently.
They still have it. Marvel still has their summits.
There's summits, but everyone's on the creative team. It's editorial. I think the architects were clearly people, and they even would say it out loud, who were like, all right, these 4 or 5 are guiding things, and it was set going forward. Whereas PKJ's at Marvel now, and he wasn't a year ago. I think,
but that not everybody's at those summits, right?
I know that, yeah.
Yeah. So what's different?
Because those are just to pitch books, like rather than pitch a universe-long event.
No, they're not. Those summits are where Marvel plans out their year of books. They've been doing them since I started reading comics.
But the architects would do more than just a year. It was like a full-on guideline.
No, man, because Civil War, didn't it come from Bendis?
Came out of that. It came from Bendis and Joss Whedon.
Yeah, and
but
Mark was the one. Mark Millar. Yeah, Mark. He and I are best pals. Mark Millar was the one that was like, "Oh, I gotta write that."
Yep.
Yep. So I think you're right in that there are architects, but I think you may be overestimating the amount of planning, that sort of comes out of that.
Maybe a little bit, but I think the idea I'm trying to get across is that there needs to be a solid creative foundation for the universe, and I think there's too much turnover. I think for that to happen, like Blood Hunt is coming out, right? Doesn't really seem planned, but it's a thing. But who really tackled most of that? Jason Aaron. He's nowhere near Blood Hunt. It's Jed McKay. It's people picking up other people's pieces because the turnover is nuts there.
Yeah. It's for me, it's real simple. If you creatively have an idea, you got to sit down and have these conversations. Where do we want to take this thing? A conversation between editorial and creatives, and plan some stuff out long term. Hickman took Avengers. I mean, that was a multi-year arc. That shit was long, and that was him. He was the only writer involved. Well, he had a co-writer on Avengers at some point, but it was all his vision, all his idea, everything else from start to finish. Now, Hickman is great, so that works. But having more cooks in the kitchen, making sure that these creatives have the right ideas and that they're all lockstep. What was more fun than when you're reading, Civil War, and you can buy She-Hulk and she's dealing with the speedball aspect and her being a lawyer and how what has happened affects her position, right? Daredevil, oh God, Matt Murdock's in prison while this is going down. Iron Fist has to take over the mantle. Spider-Man, oh my God, do I want to take my mask off or not? Like, it made the characters the point. They were driving the story, not some, oh my God, everybody's sleeping. Oh my God, everybody's a beast. It's like a prompt now is what creates events rather than characters meaningfully interacting and the tensions bringing story out. And I do think we need books to react to events. I do. I think it doesn't make any sense when they don't.
And it doesn't have to be huge.
Something.
Yeah.
An acknowledgement.
Crisis on Infinite Earths did it with the sky just being read in other books. It's like, oh, it's happening still, but like it's not affecting the story. But because you're reading that, all right, this is what's happening.
Yeah. Like at the beginning of Hoxpox, there wasn't as much of it, but in ancillary books, oh, that's right, they would mention, oh yeah, now the mutants are on another island. People are feeling a certain way about certain situations. There was rumblings, and that feels good. And I think that's effective.
I think even that Franklin Richards book at the beginning of Hoxpox is a great example of that.
Oh, the Chip book, right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
I forgot about that.
What was
The
that book
Namor
called?
conversation. That shit was hot.
I feel like the longer the X line the longer it went under Hickman, the Krakoan era, and then when he left, the more those books felt separate from each other.
Right.
It stopped feeling like a band playing together, and it started feeling like people just going into business for themselves. And that's what can't work. That doesn't work.
And like Hickman is a singular person. Like that stuff was seeded in since Ultimate Fantastic Four. Like the dude had a vision, and I'm not saying everyone could do what Hickman can do, but the blueprint is there.
But then how do you, to that point, how do you build an environment that facilitates that? Because people want to come in and tell their stories, but then if you also want to build that, if you want to look ahead and be preemptive, how do you make a space for those people to tell their stories and abide by the, not mandate, but by the larger concepts that are getting built out and planned out?
You pay them correctly. That's unfortunately the way it is.
Marco, I think to me, if you're signing up to work at Marvel or DC, you're not signing up to work for yourself. You're signing up to work for a company and a boss. And I've never understood why that is such a terrible thing. Like, this is the job. If Marvel needs you or DC needs you to interact with this event and to reflect this event's occurrence, your job at that point becomes to do that effectively. And that's it. Like, you get paid to write for Marvel. Marvel doesn't pay you to write your dream book that you've been dying to tell. Oh my God, I need this. They hire you to write the story they need you to write or draw the story they need you to draw. So to me, that's the answer. The answer is you got this job, do your job. It could be fun. I'm sure that the architects and the people at that summit that worked on Civil War and the ones every year after that while they were putting bangers out, I'm sure they were having a blast.
And that's certainly not to say that creators can't tell their own stories. Rom V's not getting hired to do Swamp Thing necessarily to tie into Poison Ivy and Suicide Squad and the 14 other books he had to tie stuff into, but that's part of the deal. You can tell your Swamp Thing story. Cool, yeah, we'll pay you to do that. Here's what we need.
Right. You can't just get to do whatever you want. There has to be some kind of,
Unless you're Bendis.
Oh man. Well, that's our take on events. What's yours? Let us know what you think about events. What are your favorites? And do you think that events can't be good anymore? Do you think that we're just too far gone from that era? Or do you think that we are on the verge of some great ones? Blood Hunt, is Blood Hunt going to get it done? You know, are you a fan of Night Terrors? Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.